Sweet surrender as I love, serve, and remember.
So we're going to do 6 statements of truth. What I'd like you to do is right now decide, we know that we're all connecting with the same presence and the same power, but we have different words. So just find, I'm just going to use universe today just to change it up, but use whatever word you want, but I just want you to get clear what that word is now, just so you're not thinking about it when you're saying the statements of truth. I want you to be really present with what we're saying, so just get clear on what I'm talking about: universe, God, spirit, divine, whatever it is for you. Just get clear which one you want to use. There's no right or wrong. There's no better or worse. You got it? Yes. Okay, so we're not going to think about it now. You're not going to worry about if it's the right one, because I want you to really be present. Another way we're going to be present with these truth statements is by breathing. So my invitation for the truth statements, for the breath, is either breathe up from the diaphragm or from your root chakra, whichever one resonates with you more. But we want the energy to come up, and then we release it down. Does that make sense? So every time I say take a breath, you're going to go up and down, and then I'll say the statement, and then you're going to repeat it after me, okay? Y'all ready? Okay, let's take a breath in. The universe always loves me. Breath in and breath out. The universe is always for me. Breath in and breath out. Universe, you always love me. It's right here. It's not way out there. It's right here. Breathe in, breathe out. Universe, you are always for me. Breathe in and breathe out. I always love me. Breathe in and breathe out. I am always for me. And I am so grateful. I release these words into the law of love. And it is done, and so it is. Amen. Feels good to be anchored in that love, yes? Those were 3 statements of truth, all said from a different perspective, and they're all true. And they all are good. So you might have resonated with some of those statements more than others. Some of, like, the one is third person, one was second person, one was first person. You might have resonate with one more than the other. You might resonate with 2 more than the other, or you just might be really into all 3 of them and love all of them. Right? It doesn't matter. You get to be you. And this is what being you is all about, that there are so many different combinations all the time. And just one individual person has many different perspectives within us. And so being you isn't about being a singular thing. This is probably why I tend to resist all labeling that, like, it's not that there isn't truth to the Myers-Briggs or an astrological sign or to, what's the other one, Enneagram. I can get information from it, and we are all multidimensional beings. And so we can use that for information to grow, but we don't ever want to limit ourselves because there's no boundaries in this infinite, beautiful, cosmic-centric world that is ours, that is each and every one of us. So part of being love is opening our heart to all of it. Just saying yes to whatever is arising. And that can take many different forms. There are times when we feel sad. There are going to be times when we're just ecstatic. There's some times when we're just neutral, or jealous, or angry, or curious and adventurous. All of it. We're all of it, all of the time, and we just say yes to all of it. This is what love is, because love doesn't come and go. Love is not conditional on what we are feeling and thinking. It is always ever present. And we are made in the image and likeness of love. So this is who we are, and just like we each have our own individual thumbprint, 8 billion of us have a different thumbprint. They can look a lot alike, but they're all unique in some nuanced way. The same is true of our soul. There are 8 billion soul prints, right? That we all have our own unique, wonderful, an individual way of being. So how do we fully become this wonderful, unique self? Before I get into that, I just want to say this week's talk and next week's talk are interrelated. Because I want to acknowledge that even as we're talking about the individual, there's also the collective. None of us are an island unto ourselves. We are always part of groups. We're part of a group here, our family group, our friend group. If you're on the BART, you're part of the BART group at that moment. We're always part of different scenarios. No one's an island, and we're all impact each other. And yet we all have to be individual too. And so today I'm focusing on the individual, and next week I'm focusing on the collective. And yet we want to know that they're intertwined. These are not two separate things, but things that are always mixing up. So part of my interest in the individual, in the collective, came from my social psychology class back in the 80s when I went to BU. It's all about being you. It was so shocking to me. We behave differently when we're in groups than when we're by ourselves. And this is almost 40 years ago, and I still can remember the visuals, like the research studies. So they had an individual go into an office. They thought they were part of a research study, and they thought they were in the office waiting to go in to take the experiment, but the experiment was happening there. They would release smoke into the office, and it was visible. They made sure you could see it. And if someone was there by themselves, they got up immediately and went to the office and said, "There's something smoking in your office." If there was more than one person, they would sit a little bit longer. Who's going to go up and say something? Are they going to say something? Do they notice it? Because they're all strangers. They don't know. And eventually someone would go tell somebody, but it would take a lot longer. They had another research study where everyone was in on it except for the one person who was being researched. They had a group of people sitting around a table looking at slides. And they were supposed to make comparisons on those slides. And so they'd all go around and vote which two things are the most similar and which two things are the most different. And at first it was fine, and then they would start making a little, like the person being experimented, like, maybe, I guess. But then they would say crazy things, like the differences were this big, and everyone in the room was like, oh yeah, those are just alike. And the person who's getting experimented, you can just see him looking around at everybody like, wait. And they would agree with everybody. I remember when I first saw that, I'm like, wow, how can you do that? But then I was thinking, I would do that, because where I would go if I was that, I'd be like, I must have heard the question wrong. Clearly they all agree, and obviously they don't, but I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just gone in agreement. Now, as we get older, I'm sure all of us would be like, what was the question again? And we might speak up a little bit more as we get to know ourselves. And this is part of this journey of becoming who we are and beginning to feel strong enough to speak when we feel a little off with the entire group. This is huge. This is huge for you on the spiritual journey. This is huge for you and your family. This is huge for you and what's happening in the world, to be true to ourselves. Because no collective can work if I'm out of alignment with myself. If I have to give up a part of myself in order to belong to a collective, I'm ultimately going to start pulling away from that collective. I'm going to feel like, yeah, they're fine, it's not a resonance, and I feel like I have to be like everybody in order for me to belong. That happens a lot. So we're going to talk about it, and we're talking about the collective next week because we need the collective. But part of what the collective needs to fulfill itself as a collective is for individuals to be in truth with who they are and be able to stand in that truth. To be able to say, I feel a little bit differently. Do I still belong here? It's a question that comes up a lot. It's been coming up a lot on our ministers' list, which I love. Is there room at the table for me? And always, as soon as you say that, I was like, of course. But sometimes we have to acknowledge, I don't feel like there's room for me here. Is there room? And we can ask, is there room for me to have a different perspective? Can I be here and be with you? And this is a really, really important question because part of the evolution of humans is the individuation process, about becoming more and more individualized. In the earlier evolution, there was a lot of pressure to conform. Some of you may have come from families or organizations that put a lot of pressure on you to think a certain way in order to fit in. And so there became like, no, I have to be myself. So I was going to come up today with 3 things to do to be yourself, but I only got to 1. So that's what I'm talking about today. And that is, think for yourself. There are so many ideas out there. There are so many different combinations of ideas. And they all have truth to them. One of the foundations of integral theory is there's partial truth to every perspective. So you never throw out any perspective and say, well, that's not. Every perspective has partial truth. So we're listening, but you have to find what you think about something. And that takes time. It takes time. That doesn't mean you don't feel, but part of the feeling and the body is intuiting, oh, this doesn't feel right. But then you have to take time to think, why doesn't this feel right? You don't just, you can get an intuitive hit, but ultimately you are here on this planet to create what you believe, how you interpret the world and become familiar with it, to be able to articulate it to other people, or at the very least to yourself. I think of Ernest Holmes, who founded Centers for Spiritual Living, and I love the synopsis that Cher gave last week about Ernest Holmes and Centers for Spiritual Living. He founded this organization because he was reading a lot of different things, comes to these principles. Here's what's interesting, though. Unity so Centers for Spiritual Living really came online in the 1920s. Unity really came online in the 1890s. And their principles are almost exactly the same. I was even a minister for a short period at Unity because the principles are the same. There's no difference. Nuance, but basically the same. So if there's already an organization that is teaching these principles, and it wasn't just Unity, there's Divine Science, there's a lot of different Nona Brooks and all these different people, a lot of women, by the way, who have their own new thought perspective. I think Emmett Fox, I don't know if he was Unity or just on his own, who knows. These principles were everywhere, so why did Ernest Holmes, he was like the last of that group. Why did he create his own organization? The principles were already out there. Because everybody, when they start learning it, we reorganize it for ourselves. That makes a little bit more sense for us. We are all doing that all of the time, which is why we have a lot of split-offs in everything. Because I like that, but it feels a little off. I always talk about, I love it, because I always have this image in my head. The very first time I took a yoga class was in the 1980s. I remember, I was being taught by a physical therapist. I was in college. And she was always talking about how everything was connected. The bones, she actually knew the anatomy of the body. And I remember I was going like this, and she came over and just moved my hand. I'm like, ow! But just that little move, it was huge. It seemed so insignificant. And then she was explaining why that little move made such a big difference. All these little things that we each have 8 billion interpretations of this world, and it takes time to figure out what our interpretation is. What's so interesting about Fillmore and Holmes, and I'm sure it's true of all of them, I just happened to read in books about each of them, is they spent an enormous amount of time thinking about what they believe. They didn't just go, I know the truth, and they just sat there saying the truth over and over and over. They were thinking about it. They were contemplating it. Well, what does this mean? And if it's one, what does that mean? If you go to Unity Village, which, by the way, Center for Spiritual Living Archives, the Science of Mind Archives, are now at Unity Village. So they're coming together, which is lovely. But if you go to Unity Village, you can go up into the library. They kept the church and the fireplace where Fillmore used to sit for hours contemplating truth. If you read Ernest Holmes, he would say, I was contemplating for hours last night. I had this thought, and I was contemplating for hours. Joel Goldsmith, I was contemplating for weeks. I couldn't figure something out, so I just kept being with it. They spend a lot of time thinking about what they think. So the invitation this week, this one point, is so, so important. What do you think? And it's important because if you don't get conscious about what you think about things, someone's going to put their thoughts into you. And you just accept them because I haven't really thought about it, so yeah, that sounds good. And that's fine sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to think about everything. There's a lot of things I choose to say, well, I don't really want to think about that. I'm happy to let someone else tell me about it. But since the spiritual journey is so personal to all of us, because we are all spiritual beings, we have to find our own truth, and that takes time. You can Google, oh, what do I think about that? Or even have a dream, look it up, I'll Google it. There's nothing wrong with that if after you do that, you sit down and say, okay, now how do I feel about that? I mean, really feel about it. And that's when you really feel into your body, and you feel into your heart, and you feel into your soul, you feel into your mind. You're bringing all of yourself into this contemplation. It's not just with our head. It's our whole being, because this is who we are. And who we are as an individual expression. As Emerson said, the universe moving through each and every one of us individually, it takes time. So ask yourself, how much time do you give yourself in your very busy lives to just think, and I don't mean think up here, to think, to reflect, to wonder, to be curious, to be in the mystery, say, well, I kind of know this, I'm not sure about this, oh, but I know this. And then, oh, but if that's true, then what about that? How much time do you give yourself to do that? And absolutely, conversations are so important. And again, we're talking about the collective next week. But you have, no matter how brilliant the people you are with, no matter how much they know or how much you get out of your conversations with them, every person has a calling to do your own reflection, your own thinking, and not depend on anyone else's thinking. All interpret. I was just thinking about. I'm rereading Yogananda's Bhagavad Gita, interpretation of Bhagavad Gita. You know how many interpretations are of the Bhagavad Gita? But then how many versions of the Bible there are? There's no absolute truth. Everything is a version. That's what we're doing. We're interpreting. So we're not, when I say know what you think, recognizing with humility, that's my interpretation. It's not the absolute truth. Nobody has the absolute truth. Nobody has the absolute truth. That's an impossibility in this human realm. Maybe when you get really, really evolved, but no. Everyone has a perspective and a truth that resonates with you. So where I want to go with this, and why it has ended up taking up most of the rest of the talk, is because I want to share a little bit of my own history around this. Not because I want to live in the past, but because it has everything to do with where I am now as a minister and where I see us going as the Lighthouse Center for Spiritual Living. So that's why I'm going to the past, okay? We're not going to stay there. It's going to bring us fully present and hopefully understand the vision for where I see the Lighthouse Center going. So I was raised by two parents who had very similar modus operandi, which is to be very curious, and think for themselves. For instance, my dad, when he was at Princeton, and he had a fellow student that was always asking to borrow his notes. And at first he gave him his notes, but the guy kept asking. And he finally said, "Why do you keep asking me for my notes? We're in the same class. I'm taking notes of the teacher." And he says, "No, you're not. You're saying about a lot of other things, and I'm curious what you're saying as well as what that teacher's saying." When I was in high school, I remember learning about the Platt Amendment in my global history class. And they were saying it was this and this, it was with Cuba. And I was talking to my dad because I was confused by it. And then he gave me a whole other perspective. I said, "Well, wait, they don't teach that in class." He goes, No. They usually teach one or the other, but there's a lot of other perspectives. He used to go nuts when we just did something because someone else did it. He wanted to know why we did what we did. We had to think for ourselves. The one thing he beat into us with love was to think, why do you think that? And if you think that just because someone else thinks that, that's not good enough. Why do you think that? What are your reasons? So I was constantly having to think, okay, that's why I think so much, because I was challenged all the time. My mother was similar. So I had an older brother. He was in middle school at the time. I was in elementary school, and he was arguing with a neighbor who was Catholic about why God didn't exist. He had 3 really great arguments. I still remember them today. I didn't have to write them down. They were seared into my soul because they made sense. And I had already had my God experience, but I'm listening to him, I'm like, So I'm in elementary school. I'm agitated. I'm like, so I went running out to the kitchen. "Mom, George is in the living room arguing for God doesn't exist." And my mom, who I was sure, who's a very strong woman, was going to go and tell my brother the what for. And instead, she turned to me and she said, "Well, Harriet, a faith that cannot stand up to questioning is not much of a faith." So I was constantly being challenged. I didn't ever have that sense of, oh, now I have the answer. I didn't come from a family that was like that. You know, you say something, they're like, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, what about this?" I'm like, "Ugh, I just want you to agree with me for once." And so I had all of that training, plus I'd had my own spiritual experience, which I knew was greater than all of this, but I also knew I grew up, no one said they were an atheist, but it was pretty apparent, except my mom. She was agnostic. She was more open. So I kept it to my school system. I didn't talk about it with anyone until in my late 20s. So I had this whole other world inside. So I listening to them, I'm like, boy, those arguments about why God doesn't exist really resonate with me. But I also had this experience. So you see, there's already this thinking, this multi-perspectives. What's that for you? You have different people that have influenced you when you were growing up, who have different perspectives that say, "Well, what about this is true?" And then you go someone else, "Well, no, this is what's really true." And people are very passionate. What are the different perspectives that have been your little sandpaper for your life? Because that is informing how you're interpreting the world now. I'm saying this because this impacts how I am in the world today. Because then I get on the spiritual journey, and again, I just don't have any peace. I've asked God, "Why don't you give me peace?" So I have many different teachers. I had my first experience when I was a kid was through the Christ. And then I went to a New Thought church, and I'm like, "Oh, this is great." And then they gave me Joel Goldsmith, who said there's no good or evil, and that threw me. Spent several years on that, found Centers for Spiritual Living through Michael Beckwith, who's a very conscious, spiritually awake being. Loved him, learned so much from Ernest Holmes, taking all the classes. But my call to ministry came through Yogananda and Shunryu Suzuki, a Hindu and a Buddhist. So I started learning. I'd already been, I didn't never heard of Yogananda when I had the vision. I did know Shunryu Suzuki, and I've been reading him since 1987. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, the book I've read the most. But now I'm reading Yogananda, and I'm not just reading him, because then I'm studying with him. I'm taking the home studies. I'm doing his meditation practices. I'm doing a Joel Goldsmith group. So while I'm going to Agape and learning CSL, I'm doing all these other things. And then I went back and started doing Zen again. And then I was learning Ramana Maharshi. And then I had a vision and learned integral theory. And I just kept, it's like, and then after integral theory, as I was sharing it the other way, then I was led to Orthodox Christianity, because that was the only path I had looked at. even though I had the experience, so I wanted to know the roots. So I'm learning from Orthodox Christianity, and I loved it. And I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to be a Christian minister, because I love that. And I couldn't do, obviously, Orthodox, but I was looking at the more liberal Protestant churches, and none of them were resonating. They felt too claustrophobic. I'm like, where do I belong? I have so many different paths, and I love all of them. I love all my teachers, but they are different. Studying with Yogananda and studying with Shunryu Suzuki, Ramana Maharshi, Ernest Holmes, Michael Beckwith, Joel Goldsmith, my Orthodox Christian buddies, they're my monks. What's the path that I'm here to teach? So I have talked about various things that have been hard for me in ministry, but this was a huge one from the day I started. I can't tell you how many tears I have cried. What am I here to teach? I have all these things, and I can't say any one of them is my path. I want my path. When Yogananda came here, he had his path. Kriya Yoga. He was teaching everyone meditation and Kriya Yoga. He did other things. He wrote interpretation of the Gospels. He did an interpretation of the Rubaiyat, Omar Khayyam, the Persian beautiful sacred writing. He did all of these things, but always it was served Kriya Yoga. He was here to do that. Bring it here to the United States. Shunryu Suzuki, Zen meditation. That's what he was here to do. Ernest Holmes, bring his version of science, of New Thought, the Science of Mind teaching. Everyone had a clear path. I didn't have a clear path. I had my own. I do the covenant, which we've done here, but it's very open-ended. So yes, it is the same heart, but there's a path. People need paths, and people resonate with different paths. And to say you don't need a path, well, that's what I'm saying. Well, no, because I did say that for so long, but it's very confusing. Because it's not the same heart, actually. They are different experiences. When I do Kriya Yoga, that is a different experience than Zen meditation. They are not, it might be the same heart, but different practices. Okay, but I want you to hear me, Barbara. Okay. This is the part about you being unique. Don't ask me to conform to your perspective, okay? I get that's your perspective. My perspective is I have different experiences when I follow these different teachers. Yes, it's all the same in the absolute, but I don't live in the absolute. I live in this world. And in the world, we have to give concrete teaching. Because otherwise, it's just like, oh, well, just follow God, just follow your heart. Then there's nothing to teach. Okay, follow your heart. I did do that. I live my life. I follow my heart. But if I'm a minister and I have something to teach, what am I here to teach? I have to have something clear. And so the science of mind is a clear teaching. So I have had my answer, and that's what I want to share today. And it came so easily and effortlessly, so full of grace, so full of peace. You ready? Yeah. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That I love what I recognize this whole journey that I've been on in CSL. Never once has anyone in home office, administration, ever said, don't do that. They have allowed me, I don't even think they would allow me. They're just like, of course. Do whatever it calls to you. And I have. And it's always been totally acceptable. I don't know, I feel like I'm breathing into the thing. So there's two elements of what CSL means, because we're going to really embrace CSL, but I want to talk about the two elements of CSL. There are Centers for Spiritual Living, the Teaching Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. It's so powerful. It teaches universal truth principles, and you practice the universal truth principles. The way I look at it is there's a wheel, and the circumference of the wheel is God. The center of the wheel is God. Then there's spokes, and each spoke is a path. So science of mind is one of those paths, just like Christianity, and then there's a million different Christianities, and there's Buddhism and there's all these different spokes with a lot of, billions of paths. And so Science of Mind is one of those paths. For me, it hasn't been the only path, obviously. That's what I've been talking about. So I have, and I know those of you who know me know this, but I don't think I've ever said it up here. I am not an ordained Center for Spiritual Living minister. I'm a licensed minister. And the reason why I did that is because I felt it would be out of integrity, because it wasn't Ernest Holmes that gave me my call to ministry. I wasn't called to, like, I'm here to teach Ernest Holmes only. He's not my main teacher. I don't have Christ as my main teacher. But all of these other teachers are part of who I am. But what I love about CSL is they do have these principles that are strong enough to embrace everything. And so what I see and love is the beauty and the power of standing in those principles to become who we are. Because everyone here is called to go on your own journey. So saying yes to CSL, there's so much I love about CSL. Part of the relief is I love the Science of Mind symbol. It's brilliant, deep, profound, one of my favorite all-time symbols of all time. I love the way treatment, powerful. I love the people. I've been doing this for 30 years. I have so many friends. I thought, I don't have to give up my friends. I don't have to go someplace else. I love my friends. They're incredible. Most of my friends are ministers. They're fantastic, deep, wonderful. We all are unique. We all have our separate style, but we have connected and found this connection. But the thing that I have loved the most about Center for Spiritual Living is its passion for spiritual education. And its structure. Before I found CSL, I was in an independent New Thought church, and they had a lot of different classes here and a lot of classes here, I couldn't figure out how they all met and where they were going. It's fine for some people. I wanted something that had direction. And when I came to Center for Spiritual Living, it was like steps. You take these classes, then you're eligible for practitioner training, and then you just, and that, so basically to become a practitioner has been 4 years. They might be shifting it a little. I'm finding it out with Kathy. But it's such a great structure to grow in. And one of the challenges I had as I was starting to do my classes was I was throwing people into the deep end without going through those steps. And I thought, oh no, because I just assumed everybody had it because I had been doing it for so many years. So call it foundations class, but the way I see it now, becoming a practitioner is actually the foundation. It's about learning who you are in oneness and universe in the oneness and union with spirit, and allowing spirit to move through you, manifesting the world outside. That's what being a practitioner does for us. So for me, foundations is becoming a practitioner. So my hope, I thought I should tell you that I have a secret agenda. I thought I should at least tell you so it's not secret. I only had a secret agenda for a month, so don't worry, I wasn't. I would like to see at least 3/4 of our community become practitioners. Because to me, that's the base of the spiritual journey. And the entire journey, I want to be very clear for those of you who are new here. This is not about drinking the Kool-Aid. This is not about you becoming to CSL to become just like other CSL people. And we have a belief system that you have to adhere to, and if you don't belong. I think I've pretty much proven that that's not true. I do everything I want. The only intention of all these principles is to help you become more you. We're going through the classes not to teach you the Kool-Aid, but to have you become you. I don't agree with everything Holmes says. I don't agree with anything anyone says, because I'm just obstinate. No, we're all like that. That's part of thinking for ourselves. So it's never like, I believe in everything they say. No, it's about saying what works for me, what doesn't work for me, going through the classes, having conversations. I love, Gloria last week was talking about, one thing she loved about classes was hearing other people's perspectives. All of that is just like growing up, having my family constantly challenge me. It's great. It's great to be challenged. It's great to have different perspectives. The one thing that I am uncomfortable with is the idea that there's only one truth and I know it, and I'm going to teach you it. That's not what this is about. It's a journey of exploration, and everybody's on their own journey, and we create a safe space for you to be on that journey, to discover who you are, and also to have that collective experience, which again is next week. And then what happens, so when I was at Agape, we had a lot of people who became practitioners. But then that was it. The education program was over. And then you're sort of like hanging out. Unless you get a call to be a minister, you're sort of like hanging out. Gets a little dull, right? No, you never did. Jerry, I don't know why I said that looking at Jerry. It's not dull. I don't mean that. What I mean is that there are other places we can go to. And that was the vision that I had years ago, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And now I'm like, oh, I need you all to become practitioners because I'm ready to go to the next stage into the more mystical truths and the mystical way of living. But that is much easier to do when you have a solid foundation. You know, Michael Beckwith, when I first, he didn't become mystical through taking these classes. He had it through a whole spiritual experience. And some people have mysticism and it comes and goes. He's been able to pretty much sustain this expanded state of consciousness. The reason why he liked Science of Mind is because it grounded him. He said, I had a hard time functioning in this world. Just on many levels, but I just like the visual of, he said, like when I would try to get into a car, I didn't know where my head stopped. And I kept hitting my head against the ceiling. I had to learn like my physical body dimensions so I could just physically operate in the world, right? And so he spent a lot of time. He became a practitioner and then spent 7 years as a practitioner before he ever became a minister. Not because he had to develop his consciousness, he had to integrate it into this world, into his individual expression called Michael Beckwith. We're all doing that. It takes time. We all have to find that time to ground in. So when I went to Agape and I took the class on mysticism that he helped co-create, it all started with get your structures in place. Be grounded, because mysticism, when it's not grounded, is all over the place and can be very unhealthy. So we ground. We have these practitioner classes. We have, and I'm going to have an advanced consciousness class next September. I don't care if I have one student. We're starting this. Kathy and I are going through, because they're changing the education program. So we're going to go through, get it straight. We're going to get a calendar out for next year. We're going to be talking to you, yes. We're moving our energy. We're going step by step. It's not just take a class here and take a class here and take a class here. It's like, no, there's a directionality because it helps us grow. And the more we continue to grow, and you grow with your classmates, you grow together and you grow as an individual. So that's what we're starting here. We're already doing it. Well, I've been because I've been up and down around it, so you might have felt that. I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. I'm in. Because I didn't have the extended, it all came together, and I don't say it came through my mind. It just went, oh, I love this. What I've been doing, I just didn't understand it. What I was trying to do was skip ahead. I'll say one more thing about that skipping ahead, and then we'll end. This past weekend, Jack and I went to visit Julian. And the great thing is he's taking an introductory to religions class. Introductory to world's religion. I was so excited, and he was telling me how much he loved the class. And we got to go sit in on it. We were the only parents there. Julian was mortified. But I loved it. But we were very clear not to say anything. We sat in the back and tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. The teacher was extraordinary. He was so good. He was interesting. The problem, and I was totally engaged, but after the class was over and we left, I started thinking about it, and I thought, that was a really clever and interesting class, which he taught really well, and I saw the whole syllabus. But it's actually not about world's religions, because he had skipped ahead. It was supposed to be the introductory to world's religions, and I said, Julian, the problem with that class, it was so good, but you actually are not learning about world's religions. You skipped. And that's what I was doing. It was a reflection back to me, I was skipping ahead, and none of us win by that. I went through every step myself. I loved it. I loved every single class. None of those classes limit you. So when I say skip ahead, you can have mystical experiences from the first class on. You don't have to, it's not like mysticism happens in the future. I was having those experiences from the beginning, but I still had to train my mind. I had to train my body. I had to train how this shows up in the world. So I'm not saying anything I haven't done. And so that's why these classes are so wonderful, because it's about becoming more of who we are. It's about becoming who you are, more and more and more, and not in any hurry. Testimony of Light, the thing she keeps saying over and over and over. For those of you who took the Testimony of Light book group that we just finished, she says over and over, she said, when I was on earth, I was always trying to get ahead to the next thing. I'm learning just to be present with where I am. So even for those of you who've been on the spiritual journey for a long time, I welcome you to this journey. It's not that you don't know things. It doesn't mean that it's just a wonderful journey that's going to continue on. And even if you don't, we're all here every Sunday to celebrate and know the power and presence of your spiritual journey, whatever your journey is, and whatever that looks like, it's always accepted here. That's the journey we're going to be offering here, but that doesn't negate any other journey that you are called to be on, because you have to be you. And that's what this center is about more than anything else, is you being you. Yes? Yes. Nice. And so rather than do a treatment, I just want to end the way we began. Would you be willing to do that with me today? Yes. Let's just stand. And also sometimes when we breathe, it's nice just to breathe with our mouth closed. It's up to you. Diaphragm up, mouth closed. So let's take a breath together, in and out. The universe always loves me. Take a deep breath in, breathe that in. Breathe it out. The universe is always for me. Breathe in and breathe out. Universe, you always love me. Breathe in and breathe out. Universe, you are always for me. Breathe in and breathe out. I always love me. Breathe in and breathe out. I am always for me. I am grateful. I am thankful. And I release this word into the law of love, knowing it is fulfilled now. And so it is. Amen.
I walk in God in all I do. I walk in God in all that I say.